Have you ever thought about a conflict where the main players almost never actually fight each other directly? Like on a battlefield, it sounds weird, right? Kind of like shadow boxing on a global scale. But what happens when two really powerful nations, far apart geographically, wage war using, other groups, secret ops, cyber stuff, but manage to avoid that all-out direct fight? Well, today, that's exactly what we're diving deep into. The complex and honestly pretty dangerous Iran-Israel proxy war.
That's right. And in this deep dive, we're going to try and unravel the really complex layers of this conflict. It's ongoing. It's got many facets. We'll show you how it plays out through these shadowy groups, covert operations, constant cyber attacks. Our mission really for you today is to get beyond just what's happening. We want you to understand why it matters and what the real costs are. Because look, direct fighting between Iran and Israel, it's been limited, but the danger, the human cost for the region and maybe even beyond, that's very, very real.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get you this picture, we've gone through quite a bit of material. We're talking web analyses, some really telling social media stuff that gives you the pulse on the ground, and detailed reports from various think tanks. It's a lot, but we're here to help unpack it all, the history, how this unique, simmering fight evolved. Okay, so let's unpack the history, because this isn't exactly new, is it? Where do we really trace the roots of this specific dynamic between Iran and Israel? Was it one big event or more gradual?
Yeah, good question. To really get it, you have to go back to one absolutely pivotal moment. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. Before 79, Iran under the Shah, well, it was actually a monarchy friendly towards Israel. They had, relatively okay relations. But the revolution just completely flipped the script. Under Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran became an Islamic republic, and it adopted this deeply anti-Zionist view. It started seeing Israel as an illegitimate state, a major adversary, often sort of grouped with the U.S. It was a really dramatic, almost overnight ideological shift, and that basically set the stage for, everything since.
Wow, so not gradual at all. A really sharp pivot in 79 that changes everything.
It really does. And what's crucial here is how deep that core ideological split became. You've got Iran, a Shia majority state, pushing this anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist ideology. It wants to export its revolution, challenge the regional status quo. Then you have Israel, a Jewish state, which sees Iran's words and, more importantly, its actions like funding Hezbollah, funding Hamas as, frankly, existential threats. You connect that to the bigger picture. Iran's goal isn't just about borders. It's about spreading its influence, creating what some people call a Shia crescent, and fundamentally challenging Israel's power in the region, and by extension, American influence too. It's a real clash of visions for the Middle East.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if they're not usually lining up armies against each other, how do they fight? You mentioned proxies. Can you walk us through that? Who are the main groups Iran uses, this axis of resistance?
Right, the proxies are key. Iran has built this pretty sophisticated network it calls the axis of resistance. It's basically a collection of non-state actors, militias, groups that Iran supports with money, weapons, training, ideology. It lets Iran extend its reach and pressure Israel without engaging directly. What's really interesting isn't just that they use proxies, but how. It's a strategy of asymmetric warfare. Lets Iran balance out Israel's, much stronger conventional military. It's relatively low cost for Iran, but high impact regionally.
So who are the big players in this axis? Can you give us some specifics?
Sure, let's break it down first, and maybe most prominently. There's Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're a powerful Shia group, both militant and political. Heavily armed, heavily funded by Iran. They fought that big war with Israel back in 2006, and they have a massive arsenal. We're talking tens of thousands of rockets pointed at Israel. That's a major factor. Then in Gaza, you have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ. Iran gives them significant financial and military backing. They're the ones often firing rockets into Israel or engaging in other operations. Moving further out, you've got various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Groups like Kataib Hezbollah, others under the PMF umbrella in Iraq. These are mostly Shia militias, Iran-backed. In Syria, too, there are pro-Iranian militias. They often target Israeli interests or even U.S. bases, which Iran sees as linked to Israel. And then more recently, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, also backed by Iran. They've started occasionally firing missiles and drones toward Israel, particularly after October 2023.
That network is incredibly widespread.
Okay, so flipping to Israel's side, they obviously rely heavily on their own military, the IDF, and their intelligence agency, Mossad. Do they use proxies in the same way, or is their approach different?
It's mostly different, yeah. Israel's approach is primarily direct. They use their military and intelligence might. They do, however, indirectly support certain groups sometimes, maybe some Kurdish factions in Iraq or Syria, for instance, mostly for intelligence gathering or to kind of counter Iran's influence in those specific spots. But it's really not on the same scale or with the same kind of public alignment as Iran's axis of resistance.
Right. Okay. And what strikes me is how this isn't just happening in one place. It's spread out. You mentioned these different groups operate in different areas.
Yeah.
These are the theaters of operation, right?
Sure.
Where are the main hot zones?
Exactly. It's very dispersed. Syria is a huge one. It's been a major battleground since the civil war started in 2011. Iran backs Assad, deploys its own forces like the IRGC, and brings in proxies like Hezbollah. Israel's response. Frequent airstrikes. Some reports say over 700 and 600 strikes since 2011. They target Iranian weapon shipments, bases, Hezbollah positions, trying to stop Iran getting entrenched right on their northern border. Then, if you move west, Lebanon. That's Hezbollah's stronghold. Israel frequently hits suspected arms convoys there. The 2006 war really showed the potential for escalation. And we've seen intense border clashes flare up again, especially in 2024 and into 2025. Then there's Gaza. Iran's support for Hamas and PIJ definitely fuels the conflicts there. The 2023-2024 war being the most devastating recent example. Over in Iraq, you have those Iran-backed militias sometimes attacking U.S. bases or interests they see as linked to Israel. Israel occasionally strikes back, but it's more limited there. And finally, way down south, Yemen and the Red Sea.
The Houthi attacks on shipping, and sometimes towards Israel itself, especially in 2024. That's seen as a really important part of Iran's wider strategy to put pressure on Israel and its allies, even disrupting global trade. It just shows how interconnected it all is.
So it's not just boots on the ground or missiles, even via proxies. It's also happening deep in the shadows, covert ops, cyber warfare. That seems like a really significant part of this. What kind of things has Israel been linked to?
Oh, absolutely. Israel is widely believed to be behind some very high-profile, very sensitive operations. Things like the assassinations of key Iranian nuclear scientists, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in 2020 is a major example. They're also strongly suspected in sabotage incidents at Iranian nuclear sites, like Natanz in 2020 and 2021. And then there's cyber warfare. The Stuxnet virus years ago was a huge deal, specifically designed to damage Iran's centrifuges. These are very precise, intelligence-heavy operations aimed at slowing Iran down.
And Iran's response in this shadow realm, they hit back.
They do. Iran has launched its own cyber attacks against Israeli infrastructure. There was an attempt on water systems back in 2020, for instance. And they also backed the proxy attacks targeting Israeli interests abroad. There were attempted bombings, like in Thailand and India around 2012, linked back to Iranian elements. So this back and forth, it's not just military posturing. It's a constant, quiet, intelligence-driven shadow war.
Yeah.
You've got Mossad on one side, Iran's IRGC quads force their elite external ops unit on the other, constantly maneuvering, clashing covertly, regionally, and sometimes even globally. The real insight maybe is how tangled it all is. Lots of deniability. Makes it incredibly hard to pin down exactly who did what sometimes.
Yeah, that really paints a picture of how war can be fought on so many levels without, traditional armies clashing head on. Which brings us to maybe the most dangerous piece of this whole puzzle, often lurking in those shadows, Iran's nuclear program. What's the latest there? How big a factor is it? It's huge. For Israel, Iran's nuclear program is the core issue. They see a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat, period. And they've openly said they might launch preemptive strikes to stop it. Now, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran has enriched uranium to very high levels, reaching 60% purity by 2023. That's technically near weapons grade. It's a big step. What makes it even more complex and adds this layer of deterrence but also tension is Israel's own nuclear capability. It's undeclared, but widely estimated at somewhere between 80 and 200 warheads.
Right. You mentioned that nuclear aspect being existential for Israel, but given Israel has its own undeclared arsenal, doesn't that kind of create a mutually assured destruction dynamic, maybe one that actually prevents a full-scale war rather than pushing towards it? Or does the nuclear threat just accelerate the proxy fighting? That's the central paradox, isn't it? It's a really profound question. On one hand, yes, the fact that Israel likely has nuclear weapons definitely acts as a deterrent. It makes a full-scale conventional war almost unthinkable because the consequences would be catastrophic. But on the other hand, it creates this intense pressure, this urgency for Israel to stop Iran from ever getting to that same point, which arguably leads to more aggressive covert actions, more intense proxy fighting, more willingness to strike preemptively in places like Syria. It means any small escalation could potentially have unbelievably serious implications down the line.
It makes the shadow war even riskier because the ultimate stakes are just so incredibly high.
That really does make the stakes chillingly clear. Okay, so let's shift to how this shadow war has sometimes, boiled over. We've seen major escalations that threaten to spill into something much bigger, much more direct. What were the key flashpoints?
There have been several really significant ones. The 2006 Lebanon war stands out. That was a brutal 34-day fight. Hezbollah, backed by Iran against Israel. Huge casualties, over 1,200 Lebanese, around 165 Israelis killed. It ended with a UN ceasefire, but it showed how devastating things could get. Then jump forward to 2018, 2019. Things got really hot in Syria. Israel ramped up its airstrikes on Iranian targets and their proxies quite significantly. And that led to retaliation rockets fired back from Iranian-linked forces based in Syria. More recently, around 2021, we saw that spike in alleged Israeli sabotage of nuclear sites and the assassination of scientists. That really ratcheted up tensions. Iran vowed revenge. Those felt like very direct signals in the deepening covert conflict.
But maybe the biggest turning point, certainly the most intense escalation we've seen lately, was the October 2023-2025 Gaza war. That felt like a fundamental shift, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was a game changer in many ways. The Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023, killing around 1,200 Israelis, triggered that massive Israeli military response in Gaza. But critically, what happened next was that other Iran-backed groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, significantly escalated their own attacks. It was like the proxy conflict suddenly intensified across multiple fronts all at once in solidarity with Hamas. But the truly unprecedented part, the really dangerous shift, was the direct Iran-Israel exchanges that followed later.
And those direct exchanges, we hadn't really seen anything quite like that before, had we, on that scale?
No, not really. Not that overt. Iran launched that massive barrage in April 2024. Over 300 drones and missiles fired directly at Israel from Iranian soil. Now, most were intercepted, thanks to Israel's defenses and help from allies. But it was a huge statement. And then Israel responded with its own retaliatory strikes, reportedly inside Iran itself. That wasn't just proxies anymore. That was the two main adversaries hitting each other directly. It showed just how thin the line between proxy war and direct war could become and how quickly.
Wow. So connecting all this, where does that leave things now, say, as of July 2025? Is it still boiling or has it settled into a new kind of normal?
Well, settled might be the wrong word. The Gaza war, the ongoing Hezbollah clashes on the Lebanon border, they've definitely intensified the whole proxy conflict significantly. Israeli operations are continuing that 2024 ground move into Lebanon. Constant airstrikes in Syria trying to hit Iran's supply lines and bases. Meanwhile, Iran keeps coordinating its proxy attacks, but it's still, carefully trying to avoid that full-blown direct war that could really risk its own regime and economy. Looking at the bigger alliances, you still see Israel strengthening ties with Arab states through things like the Abraham Accords, plus strong U.S. backing, all aimed at countering Iran. Iran, meanwhile, maintains its links with Russia, China, and key regional players like the government in Iraq. The human cost, though, it's just devastating. Thousands dead. Mostly proxy fighters, yes, but also huge numbers of civilians in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza. Local reports mentioned over 40,000 deaths in Gaza by 2024. The economic fallout, the humanitarian crises, especially in Lebanon and Gaza, are immense. And hanging over everything, those stalled nuclear talks, the JCPOA, since they broke down after 2021. Iran's nuclear program remains this critical flashpoint. Israel keeps pushing for tougher action from the West.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of this is pure strategic calculation versus this deep-seated ideological battle that seems almost impossible to resolve? So, boiling it down, what are the strategic endgames here? What is each side actually trying to achieve in this incredibly complex dance?
Okay, for Iran, their main goal seems to be weakening Israel through these proxies. They want to push back U.S. influence in the region, and they aim to establish that Shia crescent, that arc of influence stretching from Iran through Iraq, Syria, into Lebanon. But critically, they want to do all this while avoiding a direct major war that could really hurt them at home, destabilize the regime, wreck their economy.
And Israel. What are their core objectives?
For Israel, it's pretty clear, too. Number one, disrupt Iran's nuclear ambitions. That's paramount. They also want to neutralize Hezbollah's massive rocket arsenal in Lebanon, make it less of a direct threat. And they're constantly working to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military foothold in Syria or Lebanon, right on their doorstep. How do they do it? Mostly relying on their superior air power and intelligence, often striking preemptively against perceived threats. It's this constant high-stakes game of strategic moves and counter-moves, which naturally leads to the question, what are the biggest dangers looking ahead? And I think the number one risk, undeniably, is miscalculation. One proxy attack goes too far, one covert op hits the wrong target. It can easily spiral into a direct full-scale war.
especially if Iran makes a dash for a nuclear weapon, or if Israel feels it has to launch a major preemptive strike. Beyond that direct clash, the civilian toll is just horrific. We have to keep saying it. These proxy wars destroy communities, create massive humanitarian crises. Gaza and Lebanon are tragic examples right now. And this isn't just contained to the Middle East.
It pulls in global powers, the U.S., Russia, China. It affects oil prices. It destabilizes the whole region and beyond.
Yeah. This deep dive really hammers home how even these conflicts fought mainly in the shadows through others, they have incredibly profound, devastating real-world consequences. So here's a thought to leave you with. In a world where maybe traditional direct war between major powers is just too costly, too risky, is this kind of proxy war becoming the new normal for international rivalry? And if it is, how does the global community even begin to manage these indirect, messy, but incredibly dangerous conflicts that end up hurting so many people, often far from the main